Let's stay on our bridge theme for a minute to talk about a different Columbia crossing and answer one of your viewer questions. Last month, the feds announced a $200 million grant for a new Hood River Bridge. And last summer, we told you about a major toll hike on the current bridge to help fund the replacement project. But those stories got some of you wondering, why does the current Hood River Bridge have a toll in the first place? Steve wrote to us, "The Dalles Bridge just had a whole lot of maintenance and nobody charged us for it. Maybe in our taxes somewhere, but not a toll on the bridge collecting it. It makes me wonder why one bridge can be free and the other one has a toll, and they both cross the same river. Maybe it's a state bridge and the other one is privately owned?" Our team got to work on that question. It turns out Steve's guess is pretty close. The Dalles Bridge is likely like many in Oregon, owned by the state in the form of ODOT. But the Hood River Bridge is owned by the Port of Hood River. And Oregon's only other toll bridge, the Bridge of the Gods, is owned by the Port of Cascade Locks. That difference matters because ODOT has access to the State Highway Fund, which is where your gas tax dollars end up. They can use that money for road repairs and bridge maintenance. In fact, the Oregon Constitution says that is the only thing they're allowed to spend it on. The ports, on the other hand, are not so lucky. They can't access those gas tax dollars, so they need another way to fund bridge maintenance. And what's that method? Tolls. Now that's the short answer, but you don't watch the story just for the short answer, of course. So let's go a little bit deeper into this. Why are there only two bridges owned by ports in Oregon? And even if they can't use the gas tax, why do the ports use tolls instead of funding bridge maintenance some other way, like local levies or business fees? It goes back to when the Hood River Bridge and the Bridge of the Gods were first built. Both bridges were originally built by private companies in the 1920s, and those companies, of course, charged tolls. They were not acquired by the ports until about 30 years later, and it turns out the ports weren't the first ones in line. The private owners of the bridges approached multiple public agencies in the 40s and in the 50s to see if they wanted to buy the bridges. According to ODOT, when the agency was offered the chance to buy the Hood River Bridge, they said, in other terms, we'll pass. They pointed us to a State Highway Commission report from back then, which concluded that ODOT should stay far away from it because there was no money to be made after things like maintenance. The report went on to say that even if the state was given the bridge for free, it would not make financial sense for ODOT or others to own it. But something else happened around that same time. In 1949, the state legislature passed a law that allowed Oregon ports to build and operate toll bridges. So while ODOT looked at the Hood River Bridge and saw a money pit, the Port of Hood River saw the opposite.
So those tolls in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, in part, aside from taking care of the current bridge, actually went into investing in economic development in Hood River and in on the fabulously popular waterfront here in Hood River.
It was a similar situation for the Bridge of the Gods. The Port of Cascade Locks was the only interested buyer, and the tolls helped fund other port developments. The Hood River Bridge tolls still provide about 60% of the port's overall revenue, so replacing them wouldn't be easy, especially while the port is still maintaining the current bridge. Construction on the replacement is set to begin in about 2 years and wrap up in 2029. The new bridge will be owned by a new agency called the Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority, but just like the port, it will not have access to gas tax funding. 20 miles downstream in Cascade Locks, the Bridge of the Gods is in better condition, and the port has no current plans to replace it. So in summary, don't expect the tolls on either bridge to ever go away.